it 2023. So what did you check out this month?
I started out with The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms from 1953, a movie that I had seen before, but it had been a long time. This movie is kind of historically significant for 3 reasons. Number 1, this is the first movie to have nuclear weapons be responsible for a giant monster attack. Basically, atomic bomb tests in the Arctic free a dinosaur from the ice, which makes its way to New York and goes on a rampage, and that's the whole movie. Number 2, this was Ray Harryhausen's second movie, but it was the first movie where he was in charge of the effects, and basically handling all that by himself. And you can kind of tell that it's an earlier movie of his because there's not as much interaction between the creature and the live-action stuff. It's a lot more impressive in later movies when you have people actually interacting with the creatures a lot more. But it's still cool. And the monster design is one of my favorite monsters out of any movie. And the third reason it's somewhat historically significant is this is the movie that inspired the original Godzilla, which we talked about in our Godzilla review a little bit. I have to make a slight correction there where I said this movie's success in Japan is what inspired them to do that, but it was actually this movie's success in the US that inspired them to make Godzilla. What surprised me watching it this time after however long it had been was how bad this movie is. Everything other than the monster is terrible. The writing is terrible. Every single scene, everything that everybody says and does is stupid. I think stupid is the right word for it because it makes them all look like idiots. Nothing makes any sense. And you're really just sitting there waiting for the next monster scene. And it really showcases the difference in approach between Western monster movies, not even just back then, but even nowadays a lot of the time, and Japanese monster movies. The Japanese movies have characters, and obviously I'm speaking very generally, but especially back in the 60s and with the original Godzilla in the 50s, they have characters that you actually care about. They're actually entertaining when the monster is not on screen. They make a lot more sense, even when they throw in a bunch of nonsense science stuff like TNG does all the time. Those movies did the same thing, but they were entertaining, and as far as the monster stuff, you know, that is what you go to see the movie for, but even the human stuff keeps you interested while the monster's not on screen. And it still feels like it all just works as a movie. But the Western monster movies, typically, it feels like all the scenes with the humans are just an excuse to kind of get to the next monster scene. It feels almost like filler. And it feels like nobody making it and nobody watching it cares about those scenes, really, and you just sit there waiting for the next effects scene. And the effects are cool. I would still say the movie's worth watching for that, but everything in between is so dumb and so bad. And I think it's funny that a lot of people probably know this already if you know the movie, but this movie was inspired by a Ray Bradbury short story, and apparently the producers forgot where they had seen the story, and they couldn't remember what it was. And they said, we're going to make the movie anyway. And then they tried to get Ray Bradbury to write the screenplay, and he was like, wait a minute, this is familiar. And he's like, you guys are ripping off my story. And they were like, oh shit, and they paid him money, and then he didn't end up writing the screenplay anyway.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I would say check it out for the Harryhausen stuff, but there's nothing else really to get out of this movie. I rewatched Shin Godzilla from 2016, which both of us have seen before. I watched it in preparation for Shin Ultraman, which we both watched this month as well. Shin Godzilla was the first Japanese Godzilla movie in, 12 years? Yeah, it hadn't been since Final Wars in 2004, and you couldn't have a bigger difference between types of movies than between Final Wars and Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla was great. Lots of references to pretty much all of Godzilla's history in there. A really cool, modern approach to a giant monster movie, and treating it in a more realistic and serious way than a Godzilla movie has done probably since The Return of Godzilla, which I would say is probably the one that's most similar to it, both in tone and just overall concept.
You know what? We should do a video about The Return of Godzilla. Oh, we already did. Go watch it. Shameless plug.
Yeah, and we'll get to Shin Godzilla at some point in our Godzilla series. You know, whenever we do another one of those. It's been like 2 years.
Have we even done more than 2?
We've done like 5, but it's been a while. But yeah, I would say definitely check it out if you haven't, if you're a Godzilla fan. Something that I see a lot of people say online is that it's hard to watch because there's so many subtitles or whatever.
What does that mean?
Yeah, well, the thing is, a lot of those subtitles, I think that people are getting tripped up on is when a person pops up on screen, it'll tell you what their title is and their name and everything, and then it immediately flashes to the next one and says the same thing. If you think Japanese people, because there's Japanese people are also reading subtitles on those sections, if you think they can somehow read faster than people reading English and remember all that stuff, no, it's the same. That's the way the movie is supposed to be. You're not supposed to memorize all that stuff. When the name of a military vehicle pops up, you're not supposed to remember what it is. It's just giving you information. You don't actually need to know it.
You're supposed to know what it is before it shows up.
And they even have a joke about that where the main guy, as the movie goes on, he keeps kind of adding to his title because stuff keeps happening and people keep dying and stuff, and they keep kind of assigning him more stuff and finding out more about Godzilla and changing his title, and it keeps getting longer and longer as the movie goes on. You're not supposed to sit there and read all of it and remember everything that it says. It doesn't matter. That's not what it's there for. So people that get tripped up by that, you're literally watching the movie wrong. I don't know. You all you need to know is pay attention to what the characters are saying. And like, I don't know. If you have trouble with subtitles at that point, then maybe Godzilla movies are not for you.
That's why they made dubs.
Yeah.
As we'll discuss later when I talk about my stuff.
Oh, great. So Shin Ultraman was directed by one of the co-directors of Shin Godzilla and written by the guy that wrote Shin Godzilla, who was also the co-director. And I was really excited because I thought it meant we were going to get something along the same lines.
Same.
And not only am I a huge Godzilla fan, but I am a fan of the original Ultraman and Ultra Q, which was also referenced in Shin Ultraman.
I had no prior experience with Ultraman before watching this movie.
But I would say our experiences were pretty much the same after kind of the intro part, where it does kind of have a little bit of jokes relying on previous knowledge of Ultraman and Ultra Q. Once you get past that, the movie is pretty much its own thing, its own version of Ultraman. And I have to say, I thought it was really disappointing.
Yeah.
Especially after how good Evangelion, which was also the same guy, and Shin Godzilla were. This movie felt like it was trying too hard. It felt like the late episodes of Evangelion, where it starts getting more philosophical and kind of trying to explore deeper ideas, but it doesn't really make sense, both in terms of just the information that's there and in terms of the approach to an Ultraman movie like that. Ultraman, the original show, is basically just a guy that turns into a giant alien and fights monsters. There's really nothing beyond that. And I can understand why you would want to put a little bit more beyond that if you're doing a movie, especially a modern movie. But they really turned it into something else that I didn't find all that interesting. I thought the choices of adversaries for him in the movie were really weird. None of the big popular ones that I thought were going to show up showed up. And they really focused more on kind of intelligent aliens as opposed to just giant monsters. And they tried to tie everything together, which I kind of figured they would do. But I'll be honest and say there is a lot of information to absorb, and I didn't follow all of it. But part of the reason for that was I didn't find it all that interesting.
I thought it was too long.
Yeah, I would agree.
And a lot of that was because it was so episodic. You didn't have your standard acts.
Yeah, it really felt like stringing a bunch of episodes together of the show, but kind of trying to keep a storyline going across them.
Yeah, it didn't really work, because you would get these scenes where there'd be a lot of closure, and you'd be like, okay, they're wrapping up, but then, wait, there's a whole nother plot that's being introduced right now that's going to go another 40 minutes.
And for me, I think one of the biggest problems I had with it, I guess, was the humor. Shin Godzilla had a lot of humor, but it was very understated. It just kind of came out of, the situations that the characters were in. But in Shin Ultraman, they shove it into your face, and they even give like a pause for the audience to laugh. But a lot of it I didn't think was funny in the first place, and kind of treating it like a sitcom like that just did not work for me. Especially the one chick that kept slapping her ass and then started slapping other people's asses.
Yeah, so was that somehow related to the old show?
No, and I would say that was extremely out of place. The original Ultraman was kind of like the 70s Godzilla movies, where it's mostly just alien invasions and just kind of like we gotta beat the bad guys, with focus on the action. And very much kid-oriented. The original Ultraman was a kid's show. Having characters slapping their ass all the time was really weird. And I didn't find it funny. I thought it was just kind of dumb.
Yeah.
It felt like they kind of were trying to make it like a live-action anime in some ways, but I didn't really think that approach worked. I did think a lot of the cinematography was interesting, which also with Shin Godzilla, they kind of found unique ways of portraying just people talking and stuff, putting the camera in interesting places. And even during the monster battles or Ultraman versus Alien battles, I thought there was some cool camera work. I thought they did some interesting things. I especially liked when they're fighting over the city and kind of the camera goes over the whole city. That's not something you usually see in a movie like that. And even though everything was all CGI, it feels like the approach that they take to CGI in these movies is a lot better than the American approach, where it feels like there's almost no thought put into it. In the American approach, it's just we got to have big CGI battles or whatever, and that's it. The Japanese approach does feel like they think more about where the camera's going to be and what's actually happening in the shots.
Yeah, that's going to come up when I talk about some of my stuff too.
Okay. So yeah, I thought it was a big disappointment. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really like it, and especially after how good Shin Godzilla was and how much I like Ultraman, it was very disappointing.
I felt the same way.
I watched Megan from 2023, which for some reason in the title is spelled M3GAN, but it's the first movie, so I don't know.
Isn't she a robot?
Yes, she's a robot.
Is she like version 3 or something?
They do say something about it in the movie, but as far as making that the title, I mean, it's already stupid when you're watching a sequel and they put a number in the, in the middle of a word. I hate it when they do that. It's so dumb. And in this case, they're doing it in the first movie. And if they make a sequel, which they almost definitely will, because it seems like this movie has been pretty successful, are they going to turn it into a 2? I don't know.
No, they'll keep it as a 3, but they'll change the A into a 2.
That way nobody will be confused. Okay, I get it. So if you've seen the trailers for this movie, you know exactly what it's going to be. You know exactly what you're going to get. This company creates a super advanced robot, and the best thing they can think to do with it is sell it as a toy, when they could make so much more money doing so many other things.
Okay, so this technology is used for the first time in this way. It's not like there's a bunch of robots doing other more important tasks, and then they make a child toy one.
Right, no, it's actually created by a company that makes toys, which, I mean, you could say that that's where they're approaching things from, but if they came up with something this advanced, it would be so easy to market it to so many other things. But instead,
No, go ahead.
But instead, they seem to only be focusing on parents that have a lot of money and that don't want to take care of their kids, because basically the idea is Megan is going to take care of their kids for them.
Is this set in current time or is this future time?
It's current time, I guess. I mean, I don't know. The movie doesn't make any sense, in case you can't tell. And basically, the first kind of prototype model, it kind of imprints on a person, and it imprints on this little girl, and it's supposed to, protect her from emotional or physical harm, and it ends up going too far.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
Yeah, and just killing people, anybody that, I don't know, looks at the girl the wrong way or whatever. What I got out of this movie was what I was hoping to get out of Smile, which I talked about a couple months ago. That movie turned out to mostly be boring. I was hoping for a good, bad movie. Megan is a good, bad movie. I laughed a lot. Still not quite as much as I was hoping to, but it is unintentionally funny a lot. I've actually seen a lot of people refer to it as a comedy in a genuine way, and there are attempts at humor in it. It does kind of try to satirize Furbies in particular, which is weird because that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
There is some intentional humor about stuff like that, which is funny not in a genuine way, but more because it's so stupid.
So the movie's not intended to be a comedy.
No, there is intentional humor in it, but overall it is a horror movie. Does it work? No. I mean, if you're looking for just a good horror movie, this movie is stupid as hell. Makes no sense. But as a good bad movie, it was okay. It was all right. I would say it's probably worth putting on in the background. It started out kind of boring. It tried a little too hard to be a real movie at the beginning, but once it got into the actual Megan stuff, it was pretty funny. It was all right. And I think it's funny that online, apparently, a lot of people are talking about the dance that she does and how impressive it is or whatever, but that dance is literally, what you see in the trailer is the entire scene. There's nothing else in the movie. It's literally like 5 seconds of the movie. So I find it weird that people are focusing on that so much. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I would hesitantly recommend it if you're a fan of good bad movies, because this is one of them. I watched a Zorro movie from 1975, a French-Italian co-production filmed in Spain about a Mexican character who was created by an American writer. So they just needed to throw Australia in there and they'd have every country in the world covered.
So who was Zorro? Anyone notable?
Zorro was Alain Delon, a French actor who I talked about in Red Sun a ways back, where he was the bad guy in that movie, and I talked about how cool he was. In this movie, he's playing the hero, and he is cool, but I thought one of the big shortcomings of the movie was that you don't really get him as a person, because when he's in his civilian guise, he's pretending to be kind of like a pansy, like a wimpy dandy kind of guy. And then when he's in his Zorro persona, he's Zorro, so he's pretending to be, super confident and just Zorro. So you never really get him as a person, his like actual, personality. It only pops up maybe it's there at the beginning before, because it is kind of an origin story. But later in the movie, you don't really get that at all. So it's kind of like watching a Batman movie from the perspective of somebody who is not Batman. So I thought that kind of held it back. Honestly, I expected this movie to be really bad, especially from the way it started and from the fact that when I watched it on Tubi, they had this classified as a comedy. It is not a comedy. That definitely had to be some kind of mistake. But when it started, I assumed that was correct, especially because the first thing you get is the theme song, which is the worst theme song I've ever heard to anything in my life. And it plays maybe like 10 times over the course of this movie. It was so bad. Oh man, I had it stuck in my head for days afterward. It made me want to kill myself. It was terrible. It was so stupid. And if the movie was a comedy, the tone I was getting from given that theme song was that it was going to be a parody of like actual Zorro stuff. And thankfully that's not what it turned out to be. It actually turned out to be pretty good. The beginning kind of threw me off balance a lot because it kind of just throws you into everything, and I didn't know who any of the characters were, and it almost treats it like you're supposed to know who they are, but you're not. It's just I'm pretty sure they're characters just made up for the movie. I've never read the original Zorro book or anything, so I don't know, but I did grow up watching the Guy Williams Zorro show. So yeah, it kind of throws you in. You don't really know what's going on, but once Zorro's origin kind of comes about and he actually becomes Zorro, the movie picks up a lot. I was really impressed with the fight scenes because I kind of thought it was going to be the kind of thing where you just have people awkwardly swinging swords at each other and then you're just kind of waiting for the scene to be done. But you really only get 2 big fight scenes. Most of them in between are pretty short because Zorro's just kind of taking people out pretty easily. The first one reminded me of a Jackie Chan movie in terms of kind of what they were trying to do with it, because there's a lot of humor in the scene because he's kind of making fun of the bad guys the whole time, and he's using everything in the environment to kind of trip them up and just kind of traveling through this whole like set piece and just knocking stuff over and flipping over things and doing all kinds of stuff, and it was cool. It wasn't anywhere near as impressive as a Jackie Chan movie, but it felt like they were kind of trying to do the same thing. And then the other fight was at the end where he fights the main bad guy, and that fight was pretty dang cool. It went on for like 10 minutes. And it's just a one-on-one fight. Well, he's already taken out all these other bad guys out on the street, and he confronts the main guy. There's a crowd of people all around them, and they're fighting. And it goes from out on the street into a church. They go like all the way through the church up into the rafters, and then people are flying out windows, and then they end up on the roof. And they shift from using swords to at one point like there's a spear involved, and then an axe, and then torches, and it was pretty elaborate, and it was pretty cool. The guy that played the bad guy was cool too. He made a good bad guy. So I guess I would say if you're interested in a Zorro movie, this one is pretty good once you get past maybe the first third. I did think it was funny that they shot it in Spain, which means they have Spanish-speaking actors around them everywhere. But whenever the non-Spanish actors say things in Spanish, they keep putting the accents on like the wrong places where it sounded really weird, and it was hard to tell what they were supposed to be saying sometimes.
Do you think they were just fed the lines phonetically?
I don't think they were. No, I think they just read them off a sheet of paper and weren't told how to actually pronounce it and were just kind of guessing. Like instead of Garcia, the guy's name is Garcia, they kept saying Garcia. And I was like, what are they trying to say? Or like Rapido, they were saying Rapido. It was weird and distracting. And I would think that would be easy to fix because there's Spanish-speaking people all around them. But I assume they probably dubbed it afterward. But yeah, I ended up liking it, which I was not expecting. Except for that stupid theme song, which was so dumb. Oh, man. Oh, and there was a dog in the movie. And again, given that they probably dubbed the whole thing, you would think if they're going to put in sounds for the dog to make, you would take sounds that a dog makes and put them over the dog. But instead, they got a person.
Yes.
They got a person, yes. And this guy was no Frank Welker, not even close. It literally just sounds like a guy, like, going like, ruff, ruff, ruff. And like, well, that's not what he sounded like, but it was, oh man, it was so bad. And so it was really, really funny. That was very unintentionally funny. Actually, there was a lot of humor in the movie, and some of it was really stupid. There was, the Zorro's aide is a mute guy. Or maybe he's supposed to be deaf. I don't know, because he does make noises, but he can't talk. So he does everything with charades, but they're super over the top. And like every single scene that he's in is just, it's like leave the camera on him for 20 seconds too long and just have him do all these weird gesticulations and stuff that are supposed to be really funny, and they weren't. And even like later, there's Garcia is kind of like the bumbling bad guy, and there's a scene where he bends over and rips his pants, and it's very out of place. And it's, again, the camera just holds on him for a while and you're supposed to laugh, but it's not funny. He ripped his pants. Like, okay, I could get in other scenes. Like when Zorro's making fun of the bad guys, that stuff was funny. He's kind of humiliating them in front of like crowds of people. Like his whole thing is taking down oppressive government people and stuff like that. So it makes sense that he's making fun of them in front of everybody.
So I'm imagining like a Harpo Marx situation with the not talking.
Yes, but stupider. I don't know. That was, yeah, the humor didn't work a lot of the time, but I still enjoyed the movie overall. Oh, and there was a scene where Zorro is fleeing from some bad guys, and he's in a carriage or whatever, being drawn by 4 horses, and he just runs it right off a cliff into the ocean. And I went back and watched the scene multiple times to try to figure out if they actually used real horses when they threw it off the cliff. And my conclusion was, I don't know. They might have. There's a shot when it hits the water, and that's very clearly a miniature, but there's a shot from below when it goes off the cliff. And I'm not sure if they used real horses or not. They may have done it for real. It was impressive either way, that they killed those horses for this movie. That's everything I watched. I read The Three-Body Problem from 2014, which was by a Chinese author whose name I have no idea how to pronounce, so I'm not going to try. This was a sci-fi novel that has been getting a lot of attention ever since it came out over here. I assume it got a lot of attention in China too. I was always kind of hesitant with this one, partially because I don't read a lot of newer books, but also because I kind of figured I don't know, for some reason I got the impression that it was going to be kind of boring and something along the lines of like Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 book, where it's very technical and just all about like explaining everything in extreme detail, which I guess people might think that I would like that based on how I talk about all the stupid science crap in TNG. And I do like that most of the time when the writing is also good. And this is not to knock Arthur C. Clarke, because I've liked other things that he's done, but his 2001 book was really boring. But this book turned out to be really good, and not like that at all. Most of it was almost like following a character that's kind of piecing together a conspiracy theory. He knows the government knows about something weird that's going on. There's all these weird, seemingly unrelated things, some of which appear to be supernatural, that are all somehow related to each other. And then there's a VR game that ties into it too. And for a long time, the book kind of has you not knowing what's going on. It isn't actually until pretty late in the book that you find out what kind of is behind everything. But it does all end up coming together in a way that makes sense and is very satisfying and is very interesting, because I'm not going to give it away, but it's a very common, old-fashioned sci-fi idea in the background, but the approach to it is very unique and really interesting. I thought the VR segments were the weakest part of the book by far, because this guy goes into this VR game that he knows is tied into everything somehow, and he just plays it for extended sequences. And especially the first time he goes in there, it seems like he's in there for a long time, and you as the reader don't know what the significance is, and his experience in the game. First of all, it's the idea of reading about somebody playing a video game does not exactly sound intriguing or appealing, but his experience in the game is basically him just sitting there watching things happen. He's just an observer. And it definitely felt like the author was not familiar with video games, because that's pretty much all the game is you sit and you observe. And you're kind of supposed to, it's kind of like a puzzle game, I guess. You're supposed to kind of figure things out a little bit. But later in the book, they bring a bunch of people in that are supposed to be really good at the game, but it's a game where you just kind of sit there and watch. So I don't know how you could be good at that, or how somebody could be bad at that. So that definitely felt like it didn't quite work. And it's hard to talk about this without giving too much away, but it was really good. I really liked it. There were a lot of things in it that didn't make sense, that honestly, some of them I didn't even think about until after the book was over. Like the main guy, I guess there's not really a main character, but the guy that you kind of follow in the present, because it jumps back to the past. There's a lot of flashbacks. The guy that you follow in the present that's kind of piecing things together, at one point, his wife and kid are kind of worried about him because he's being really weird and paranoid about everything. And this is pretty early on. And they kind of talk to him and are like, hey, what's going on? Like, I don't know, you're acting weird. He doesn't explain to them. And then they never show up again through the rest of the entire book. And I don't think they ever even get referenced. And this guy's just going off doing stuff on his own and everything. So do they think that he just left or disappeared? It seems like he goes back home to sleep, but he never talks to his family. I don't know. That was a little weird. And that's kind of how the book was. It felt like the author kind of would forget about things sometimes and just be like, well, you know what? It doesn't matter. That's not what this story is, and just focus on other things. But the things that he did focus on were really interesting and really unique. So I ended up having a lot of questions about it by the time it was over. And it actually, one thing that was funny is it reminded me of King Kong vs. Godzilla with the super strong string that they used to lift Kong and drop him onto Godzilla.
And the guy swinging off his balcony with it.
Yeah, this guy in the book, early on, they're like, he invented some super strong string. And I was like, what? And it's just like a little offhand thing that just comes in out of nowhere, and then it doesn't come up again until you get toward the end of the book. And then they're like, hey, this super strong string is really important. We need to get back to that plot element. And there's a scene where, without spoiling anything, they set the string up in a way where something is going to pass through it, and it's going to chop it up. And I guess, I'll say a little bit. There's a boat that's going to be traveling through the Panama Canal, and they set up this string to chop up this boat. and the boat passes through the string, and they're kind of watching from the sides, and they're like, oh, I guess maybe it didn't work, maybe something happened with the string or whatever. And then there's a guy standing on the deck, and his hands just fall off because they got chopped off by the string, and then like the top half of his body falls off, and then pieces of the boat start falling off, and it's like, is the boat not meeting any kind of resistance when it hits the string? Like, how does that work? I don't know. It was a little bit unintentionally goofy, and there are a few other things like that where it doesn't really make sense with reality, I guess. But the things that were interesting were so interesting, and the book was very entertaining the whole way through. It didn't have any slow points or anything other than when he goes into the VR game sometimes. And I think part of what made that work is every maybe like 60 pages, it feels like it turns into a different book, because sometimes you'll be focusing on a different character and it'll be a completely different setting, and it feels like you're constantly being introduced to something new, to new concepts and new angles on everything. And by the end of the book, it all comes together into a really like huge scale sci-fi story involving basically the entire world and maybe multiple worlds. And there's some pretty crazy visual stuff toward the end, visual ideas, including, without spoiling things, a giant eyeball floating in the sky that's like the size of the planet, and all. There's a lot of crazy stuff in this book, and some of it felt kind of out of place. It felt like the author was just like, hey, I have this idea, I'm going to throw it in there, even if it doesn't affect anything. But I would definitely recommend this. And it is part of a trilogy, and there's even a fourth book that was written by a different author. But if this was the only book, I would still be satisfied. It does come together in a way that makes sense and feels like a conclusion. It feels like an ending. And it's clear that there is more that is going to happen later. But if it was just this book, it wouldn't feel like you were missing something. It wouldn't feel like it was unfinished. So I would definitely say, for people who are interested in sci-fi that explores things in kind of unique ways and has a lot of crazy ideas in it, this is a book to check out. I read The Turn of the Screw by Henry James from 1898. I talked about this when I talked about The Haunting of Hill House a little bit. This is another ghost story, which was also made into a movie that I really liked, which was The Innocents from 1961. Actually, this has been made into a movie a bunch of times. I think The Others, that Nicole Kidman movie, I think was also based on this.
Yeah, I think so.
I was really surprised at how much I didn't like this, mostly because it was really hard to read, and it felt like it was way too long for what it was. It was a novella, so it was only like 100 pages, but it felt like it was way longer than that. And this guy's sentences, I talked about Melville using long sentences, but this guy's sentences are ridiculous. He's just throwing clauses and clauses together and stringing them. I've never seen so many semicolons in my entire life. It was absurd. Should be illegal. It was way too much. So the idea is this woman is going to take care of these two kids, and they have like some servants in the house and stuff, but their mother has died and their father is off doing something else. I don't even remember what. It doesn't really matter. But she's there taking care of these two kids, and at first they seem like perfect kids, and she's like totally in love with them and everything, and she's loving her job. But she starts seeing people on the property that should not be there. And when she reports them to one of the other people there, she finds that they fit the description of previous people that they knew that ended up dying. And it seems like there is a pair of ghosts of people that were in love with each other when they were alive that are, for some reason, trying to influence the kids. And it leaves things ambiguous. It doesn't tell you exactly what they're trying to do, but you can kind of figure out, you can get ideas of what they're trying to do. And apparently what people like about this story is that you can read it as a ghost story, or you can read it as a story where the main woman is crazy and is just imagining all this, because nobody else sees any of this. And the kids only act weird when she's the only one around. Nobody else sees any of it. But for me, that reading doesn't make sense, because you already know that one of the kids was expelled from his school for acting weird. Or, well, you really don't find out exactly why, but nobody seems to understand why he was expelled. And the ghosts that she supposedly sees fit the description of people that these other people already knew about, having been there, so I would think they would have to be real ghosts. And basically the entire book amounts to, you'll get like 4 pages at a time of just solid walls of text of this woman just going through her life and occasionally seeing a ghost or whatever. And it's really hard to read. And then you'll get maybe like 4 pages of dialogue where she talks to one of like the servant women and explains what happened. But their conversations always go with her starting out by saying, I just saw something really weird, but she'll say it in a really ambiguous way where the other person, the servant, will say, what do you mean by that? And then she'll explain, but in a way that's really kind of awkward and raises more questions. So the servant will say, well, what do you mean by that? And it goes on for 4 pages like that. And then you get back to another like solid wall of text, and it just keeps going like that until the book's over. And it's basically just just a bunch of ghost encounter scenes in between the scenes with the kids, but most of them are kind of the same. So it takes a long time before you really start learning things, and there's not really that much to learn because it doesn't really tell you that much. You're kind of supposed to piece things together, but it's not really interesting. There's not really a lot to it. So I was really disappointed. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I thought it was bad, but it was very lacking, and I don't think it really merits the analysis that a lot of people seem to give it. And definitely I thought the writing was bad. You know, the fact that it's from 1898 doesn't mean anything. There are a lot of good writers from that period, and I don't think this guy is one of them, even though he seems to be, I don't know, seen as a classic writer. Maybe his other stuff is better. I don't know. But this seems to be his most famous thing. So, I don't know. I think people read into it more than it's really worth. I read Buffy Legacy Edition Book 2, which is the second volume of the Dark Horse comics that were coming out back when the show was airing. So these issues were from the second half of Season 3. I talked about the first volume sometime before and how it pretty much was not good and felt like a bunch of throwaway stories made by people that didn't really seem to care about what they were doing. This volume was much better. It still wasn't great, but it at least felt like they were trying. The art was definitely way better. They got some artists that actually know how to draw the actors. When I talked about the first one, I speculated that maybe they didn't have the rights to the character likenesses, but they definitely do, because now they suddenly look like they're supposed to. But every once in a while, you'll get one of those artists from before, and it goes back to looking like crap. On the storytelling side, the art could still use some work, because there are times when I think there are supposed to be visual jokes, because there's no dialogue, there's just a couple of panels of character reactions, and I think it's supposed to be funny, but I can't tell what their expressions are supposed to be, or what is supposed to be happening sometimes, so it doesn't work, and it just feels like a very awkward pause. Spike and Drusilla show up a little bit in the background, and it seems like they're going to try to do more with them later. And I am curious to see what comes of that. They actually did have more of an ongoing plot line this time. The first volume was pretty much just standalone stuff, but in this one, there's a scientist that is helping this female vampire by creating a serum that makes vampires super strong, like even more than usual, and it also de-ages them if they're old or something like that. They set that up in the first volume a little bit. I couldn't remember exactly what happened, but something was wrong with this vampire. She was dying or something, but now she's young and she's kind of like the main bad guy, and it even gets to the point where they get some of Buffy's DNA and they start cloning Buffy, and you get like a monster clone of Buffy, and you get a clone of Buffy that looks like Buffy, but she's evil. In some ways, it was better than the show at the time, which I mean that, you know, it wasn't great. So it doesn't take much to beat that out, but it still, I don't know, it felt a lot more in line with the show in terms of quality. So it still could have been better, but it was way better than Volume 1. And one thing that really bugged me was almost every single story ends with a really bad joke, like the kind of jokes you would get in Season 1 of TNG, where you would have that dumb music come in. And it got to the point where I was trying to predict what the joke was going to be at the end. And I would say I got it right maybe like 2/3 of the time. I predicted what the joke was going to be, and it was just as dumb as I thought it was going to be. So I don't know. It was way better than Volume 1, but still not great. If you're a fan of the show, you might like it. I would say if you wanted to check out those comics, I would start with Volume 2 and skip Volume 1. And if you like Volume 2, maybe go back to Volume 1. But Volume 1 was not, I don't think even fans of the show would really have liked Volume 1. I finished New Gods by Jack Kirby, which you talked about a ways back, and we've both talked about the Fourth World a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But I read all of it. I read the Hunger Dogs and all that stuff. I thought it was cool that issue that he did in that, when they did like a 6-issue miniseries or whatever, where they reprinted the original issues and then he did like a new final story.
Right.
I thought it was cool that it ended with Orion just getting all shot up and dumped into like a pit of fire or whatever. I legitimately was not expecting that. And I can't imagine what it would have been like reading it back then and being like, this is the final issue, and freaking Orion just gets blasted, and like Darkseid wins basically in that issue. But like you said before, I remember you saying that it felt like they didn't fit in with the older issues. Like it felt like Jack Kirby was not the same person anymore, and I definitely agree. Everything about his storytelling style is completely different, and it feels like he does a lot more of pages that barely have any dialogue or even don't have any dialogue. Just like big splash pages and stuff. And when I got to that final issue of that miniseries, I said, wow, it's like 40 pages or something. Like, this is going to be a lot of story. But I think it took less time to read that whole 40 pages, than it did to read a normal issue of the previous New Gods series. It felt like it was lacking a lot of the complexity that the original series had in terms of, not just in terms of the characters and their personalities, but just in terms of everything that was happening.
Yeah.
It felt a lot simpler and very disappointing. And yeah, unintentionally goofy sometimes. I thought it was weird how much he used quotation marks. How many words he would throw quotation marks around in the Hunger Dogs. It seemed like every other page there was some word that somebody kept repeating that had quotation marks around it.
Even though it was the same person, it's almost like he read his old stuff and then acted like he was interpreting and reimagining his old stuff, but as a different person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it had I think a much stronger kind of anti-war kind of message to it, I guess, but it didn't really work because it felt very basic on the one hand, but then also like the elements that he was using to represent kind of real concepts, the way they related to each other wasn't the way they relate to each other in real life, so the analogy didn't quite work. And it seemed like, what was the Micromark?
Yeah.
Micromark, at times, I mean, it's obviously relating to like nuclear weapons, but then it seems like other times he's kind of, the way Darkseid sets up, he's kind of like turning all of Apocalypse into a technology-based thing or something like that.
Right.
It seemed like almost like an anti-technology message.
Well, I think I mentioned this, but Darkseid himself is the one who told everyone to shift over, but then he seems upset that everything has shifted over.
Yeah, and it definitely felt like, I mean, you talked before about how he didn't feel like the same Darkseid. He didn't have that commanding presence anymore, and it felt like even to the other characters, he didn't have that presence anymore. Like, a lot of them treated him disrespectfully, and they were, openly rebelling against him and stuff.
Yeah, things were completely out of his control, which is the opposite of the way Darkseid used to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I questioned why he would have done that in the first place, and it's never explained, never brought up, and it doesn't really make sense. It felt like, what it felt like to me was that Jack Kirby had ideas in the present that he wanted to find an outlet for, like, his anti-nuclear, whatever, ideas, and he just said, well, this is what I'm working on, so I'm just going to throw him into this, even if it doesn't fit. And yeah, it was a very disappointing conclusion to the whole thing.
The one thing I did like a lot, and I don't know if I mentioned this, was the fact that there was the character who was the little kid in the old stories, and he had been
yeah,
Isaac.
I think so, yeah.
And he grew up, but he had been deformed and just twisted into this sadistic jerk.
Little monster guy, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, you did still have cool ideas. It just felt like they weren't developed. He just kind of threw them in there and expected them to kind of speak for themselves. But, I mean, that worked in the older stories because he would give them time. He would focus an entire story around things like that. But in here, it's kind of like, well, I have this one story, and I'm just going to kind of throw these ideas into it, whether they work or not.
Right.
And it also felt like he was trying to play around with kind of page compositions and panels and stuff like that, but he did it in a way where honestly it was kind of confusing to read sometimes, and I wasn't sure where I was supposed to go on the panels.
Well, back in the day, that was his jam. I mean, he had those really cool page layouts and experimenting with all kinds of stuff like that. He was really good at it. But trying it now, it just didn't have the same oomph, especially because there had been so much progress in all of those decades.
Yeah, it felt to me like he felt like he had to put something like that in there, but he didn't actually have an idea for it, so he just kind of made something up.
Right.
And it didn't feel like it was thought out or anything. And I thought it was disappointing that Mr. Miracle didn't show up, that Forever People didn't show up. It really was just Orion and Light Ray and Darkseid, basically. I guess Highfather was in there a little bit.
It just shows how rushed he probably felt. Because, I mean, I'm sure he was ecstatic at first when DC told him, yeah, we're going to give you a chance to finish this off. Because who has that kind of chance,
Yeah.
But then also saying, and it needs to be done by tomorrow.
Yeah, and they probably gave him like a page limit and stuff like that, too.
Right. And I'm sure a bunch of directives that he had to follow.
Yeah. I'm surprised they didn't make him stick Superman or something in there. So it was a disappointing conclusion, but I would still highly recommend checking all those comics out.
Oh, yeah.
The stuff that works makes it totally worth it.
For sure.
And if you're just a DC fan, I mean, this has become core DC Universe stuff with, again, Darkseid being the top villain that DC has. And there's a reason for that. So I would definitely recommend checking these out. I finally finished playing Red Faction on the PS2.
Wow, that only took what, 25 years?
Yeah, it took so long because I stopped playing it because I kind of got tired of it. I mentioned before that it felt like they were kind of trying to do a Half-Life kind of thing, and I feel like Half-Life has sections that kind of go on for too long, the first one, and Red Faction definitely does. I also said before that they seem to be emulating Half-Life in the way that they do their storytelling, where it's all in-game and there's no cutscenes. But there's actually a lot of cutscenes in the second half. Which was also really weird because you get so few early on and all of a sudden you have all these cutscenes. And I thought it was a bold choice to have the main character be just a total dumbass. The character that you play as in the cutscenes. He is just the dumbest person alive. He goes up against a guy with a force field, and the guy's like, "You can't hurt me." And he's like shooting his pistol at the force field, and the camera just holds on him there shooting for like 10 seconds, and it's not doing anything. And it was really funny. And his expressions are so dumb. And they kind of try to give him like some badass lines sometimes, but it feels like almost like a parody. But I don't think it's supposed to. And you do have characters kind of make fun of him later in ways that are supposed to be funny. But even when it wasn't supposed to be funny, it was unintentionally funny. The game was definitely too long. It could have used a bit more variety in certain areas. I mean, you're fighting through underground tunnels on Mars for a lot of it, and there are some sections that are very distinctly different, but then there are some sections that just feel like they go on for a long time and are just kind of the same. I thought they could have used the environmental destruction element a lot more than they did. Early on, it felt like it was going to be a big part of the game, and there are times when you can use it to get around different areas and stuff, but toward the end of the game, it felt like it was just kind of a background element, like it's just something that happens, is when you use explosives, it blows up the environment. I didn't mention the vehicles, I don't think. There are a lot of vehicles in the game, and they all control differently, and they all feel good, and it does help break up the game. I would recommend it for people that are fans of first-person shooters and are willing to play a PS2 one that isn't the best, but it's a lot of fun still. And I played it on hard. It was really, really hard. By the time you get to the end of the game, you're fighting enemies that have a gun that lets them see through walls and will kill you in one shot. So it was pretty hard. Luckily, you do get that gun as well. But it's the kind of game where you can save anywhere, and you have to do a lot of rotating saves, because I actually filled up my memory card at one point because I had so many saves, because you never know when you're going to kind of get stuck because you have no health, and the next room you have to go into is filled with enemies. That happened to me a bunch of times, and I'm still surprised that I actually got past some of those areas, but it took a lot of tries. So, I don't know. I would recommend it. Nobody's ever going to put this on their best games of PS2 list, but I could see people putting it on their favorite games of PS2 list. I could see people having a personal affection for this game. And then I played Resident Evil 7 on the PS4. I think I talked about this a little bit before, that I tried playing it in VR before, and I just didn't like it.
Because you got too scared and wet your pants.
Uh-huh. It was one of those games that made me feel physically ill in VR. There aren't really that many games that did that, but...
Because it was so gross.
Yeah. No, something about just the way... I don't know what it is. Something about the movement or something. There are some games that I have no problems with, like No Man's Sky in VR is really cool, but this game, just I could not play it for too long at a time.
I remember growing up, one of my relatives got a Nintendo 64 right when it came out, and Mario 64 with it, because it was the big thing. And they didn't play video games or really know anything about that, but it was like the big hot ticket item for that Christmas.
Yeah.
And I was very excited, because there was no way I would have a Nintendo 64. And he played Mario 64 for about 5 minutes and said it made him feel sick. And it was great, because I just played it the entire day.
Yeah, it is interesting what games will do that for people, because this time that I played through it, I did not play it in VR. I started the whole thing over in just on the TV, and it still kind of gave me a bit of a headache, and I've never experienced that with a game outside of VR, so I don't know.
So you're one of those people, when that little disclaimer pops up and prevents me from starting my game because it talks about some people might feel nauseous, you're one of those people.
No, this is the only game outside of VR that has ever done that. I think even in VR, the only games that did that were this and Skyrim.
I think you need to check with your doctor before playing any video games.
This game, when I first played it, I was expecting, just from the reputation that it had, that it was supposed to be really scary, and it was like taking Resident Evil in a new, more realistic direction or whatever. That's what I was hoping for, and for me, that's not what I got.
Well, any direction away from 6 is a good direction.
Yeah, I still haven't played 5 or 6, but I do want to.
No, you don't.
Well, not for the right out of curiosity.
Okay.
Yeah, this game was just too goofy. The antagonists are so over the top. And when I got to the freaking chainsaw battle. I was just like, oh man. It definitely took a lot from the Texas Chainsaw movies where you have kind of the dinner scene. And then that scene reminded me of the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, where freaking Dennis Hopper and Leatherface are having a chainsaw sword fight. That's basically what it was. And it was not what I wanted. It was just so goofy. But the segments in between where you're not fighting, some of the boss battles were really good. But the segments in between, I did really like some of them. There were some really scary parts where you're sneaking around and everything, and you can't see very well. I actually kind of hated it at first, the way your character doesn't just turn his flashlight on all the time, and the way you really can't see in certain areas. And there are a couple areas where that's kind of frustrating early on, but I feel like once you figure out how the game is and how it handles that, it gets a lot better.
You got to conserve those batteries. Inflation is out of control.
That's true. But yeah, I did end up liking it a lot. I still thought it was really stupid. It still felt like it. Every Capcom game has that dumb, over-the-top, goofy-ass character design and goofy-ass like action set pieces. They can't ever just let a horror game be a horror game, which is why I always preferred Silent Hill 1 through 4, because those games it feels like they're going for something on a higher level than a Resident Evil ever would. And they succeed, in my opinion. I think those games are great. That's definitely my favorite video game series, is Silent Hill 1 through 4. And as much as I like Resident Evil, it's a different thing.
Yeah, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people like the goofiness, even in the old games. To them, like, the cheese is part of what makes Resident Evil Resident Evil.
Right.
But I always took my Resident Evil seriously, even back then, and it doesn't feel like a lot of the cheese is intentional, but it always ends up in there.
I don't know if I would agree with that.
Some of it definitely is, but I mean, the voice acting definitely is not in like the early Resident Evils, but it always ends up in there, and I'm not a fan of those elements. I want just a straight horror game.
I just think you need to get over the fact that the games are never going to be as good as the movies. Okay?
Well, see, I was thinking about that, and I feel like what the movies are trying to do and what the games are trying to do is the same thing, which is just be like super badass and big action horror things. And they do it in very different ways. And I mean, obviously the movies are total shit and they fail regardless of what they're trying to do. But it feels like they're kind of trying to do the same thing. And Silent Hill is aiming for something much more psychological with more depth and with more intelligence. And I just like that a lot more.
Silent Hill is art.
Yes, the games, yes. I would say, yes, the early games are art. Resident Evil is not. That's a good distinction there. That's what I would say. But I still like them. I mean, I love Resident Evil 2 in particular, and the first one. So I did enjoy 7. I am enjoying playing through it on Madhouse. I actually really like the changes that they make, where all the items are in different places, and there's a lot more that is different than I expected, and I'm really enjoying that. It really does feel like a very new experience. I was disappointed by the lack of enemy variety. There's really only a couple of types of enemies in the game. But there are some unique segments. I really liked some of the puzzles. They're definitely better puzzles than Resident Evil games usually have. So yeah, I would say I really liked it, but with reservations. So that's everything I checked out this month. What did you check out?
I watched Re-Animator from 1985, which is a Stuart Gordon movie, probably one of his best. For those who don't know, it's kind of a modern-day Frankenstein. So there's a med student who creates a serum that gives reanimation to dead tissue, and he does experiments on stuff, and it plays out as a horror comedy, and I think it does it really well. And you got Jeffrey Combs, you got Barbara Crampton, you got David Gale, who I think does a great job as a slimeball villain in pretty much every way.
Yes.
And I really haven't seen him in anything else. Like, his motivations, I get it first. He wants to steal the work. But once his head gets chopped off and he overpowers Jeffrey Combs, I'm not really sure what his goals are at that point.
Yeah, I don't think it's the kind of movie where you're really going to ask those questions in a serious way, though. It's mostly just entertainment.
I have not seen either sequel, but I get the feeling that it's probably not worth it.
Yeah, that's my impression.
I watched Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla from 1974. And where I was watching it only had the dubbed version available, which is okay, because that's the way we always watched it growing up.
So you're one of those people that can't stand subtitles.
No, I prefer subtitles, but I didn't have a choice in this case. So Godzilla shows up, he starts trashing Japan, beats up Anguirus. I love that jaw-breaking scene. That's the best.
Oh man, that always disturbed me as a kid. Like, legitimately, I always felt sick. Like, bad sick, not like queasy sick.
So Godzilla eventually runs into Godzilla, and reveals that it's not actually Godzilla, but it's a robot Godzilla being controlled by aliens who are hanging out underground, and they're disguised as humans, but they're all wearing silver jumpsuits, so it doesn't really work. And when they get damaged, they turn into gorillas, which is great.
And why would they even wear their disguises when they're in their own base?
And there's an ancient prophecy about another monster who turns out to be King Shisa. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
That's not how it's spelled.
That's not how they spell it in English, because they're going off the English dub, basically.
Oh, okay.
But the Shisai is a creature from Japanese mythology, basically.
Oh, I did not know that. So where does Mechagodzilla fit into Japanese mythology? It's always a good time. And the dubbing of the main alien is so good. Just how he phrases things and talks. Mechagodzilla, defeat Godzilla quickly. So good.
And I think given that those 70s Godzilla movies tended to be very goofy intentionally and, very much for kids and just pure entertainment, I think the dubbing works almost with the movie in those cases. It doesn't feel like it's ruining the movie the way it does with some of the older ones.
Right. And I regularly use the term space titanium whenever I can.
I do too, but nobody ever knows what I'm talking about.
I watched this movie from 1983. It was a Filipino movie called The Killing of Satan, which I did on a whim. I said, this looks weird, and if it's really too dumb, I'll stop after 10 minutes. What a ride. The description says, a guy who is a former convict travels to an island full of evil. And I said, all right, you sold me to at least try it. But what it's really about is this dude named Lando, so you're already off to a good start. And he gets shot in the head, but his wound is transferred to a relative on a completely different island, and they die. And this relative had supernatural powers, and he transfers them to Lando, because Lando is going to lead the people. And all of the people on the island seem to have supernatural powers. And we're talking like Hanna-Barbera cartoon beams shooting out of their hands. And you're imagining how bad and dumb it looks. It is worse and even dumber than what you're imagining.
All right, you've sold me. I'm definitely going to check this out.
And there's another group of people on the island who also have cartoon superpowers, and they kidnap some of the village girls, including Lando's daughter. So that's his impetus to go rescue them and learn to use his powers. And he can project this energy shield, and you would think, he holds out his hand, or at least a finger, but he sticks his elbow forward, and that's where it generates from. And he can heal wounds by reciting Christian words. The whole movie had a very not subtle Christian undertone. And the person leading this group of bad guys is the Prince of Magic, which is a good title. And he's dressed in a 90s era Marvel Mephisto Halloween costume. And there are rotting corpses attacking people, and people that turn into snakes, and snakes that turn into people, and people getting their faces ripped off, and Satan, who at one point turns into another version of Satan that just looks like Dracula, and people that shoot energy beams and stare at people for extended periods of time, which kills them. And after a slow first 20-30 minutes, the whole thing just goes wild. It was so entertaining, and you truly did not know what was going to happen next. And it was dubbed so badly, which made it an even more entertaining experience. I watched a movie from 1978 called Devil Dog, The Hound of Hell. It was a month of excellent movies, as you can tell. There's a satanic cult that buys a dog, and they hold a ceremony where they impregnate the dog by Satan, who is taking the form of a dog. And it births a litter of Satan puppies, and they're all German shepherds. And this unsuspecting family, whose dog dies, buys one of these puppies, and it slowly turns them into its slaves. And kills anyone who resists. And it was an interesting concept. It was low budget. And the family was actually decent actors, even the kids. And it was pretty goofy to see them go from, aw, shucks, and gee willikers, into straight up evil servants of the dog. And they lie and they cheat and they steal and they try and seduce their way to achieve their ultimate goal, which is to just be evil, I guess. I don't see how much more they could have accomplished just as the family, but the dog only takes over the family, except the dad. The dad has to save everybody. And the dog's true form was pretty typical of 70s horror TV monster stuff. They make the dog really big. They put on some Halloween costume lion mane thing. They crank up the contrast and lower the exposure so it looks like the dog is more evil. I don't really know how to explain it. But because the dog is big and supposed to be standing in a big factory, they can't show its feet, so they just put a bunch of fog by its legs. It was pretty dumb. If you had something else to watch, I would watch that instead.
Oh, you're making it sound pretty good.
But they do manage to kill it. But there's still 9 puppies out there. I watched Three from Hell from 2019. It is the sequel to The Devil's Rejects, so it's Rob Zombie. But since Sid Haig was in no condition to be in any movie, he's replaced by the guy who plays Joe Chill in Batman Begins. And Sid Haig is in one scene, and he just looks like death. The movie was very aimless, and the writing and acting were just rehashing old points from The Devil's Rejects, which everybody on screen seemed painfully aware of. It was really dumb.
Wait a minute, didn't they all die at the end?
No.
Okay.
That's the only explanation you need. No. I watched a movie from 2022 called The Wonder, which is set in the mid-1800s, and there are reports of a girl living in rural Ireland who purportedly doesn't need to eat, and she hasn't eaten in 4 months, so the village kind of wants to find out what's going on, so they hire an English nurse and a nun to observe the girl, but not at the same time. They take shifts. And the family is religious, and they had a son who you find out died earlier, and we get little background pieces here and there as time goes on. And the girl seems fine, but a little reserved. And the nurse is observing, and she's skeptical, and she puts different rules in place to kind of determine what is actually happening. And eventually she does figure it out. And up until the point of the reveal, the movie did a good job of keeping you wondering, no pun intended. Like, I was wondering, is there something nefarious going on with the family? Is it the village council? Is the whole village involved? Is it supernatural because they're religious? Is it going to involve something with that? And really, I would have been okay with any of the above. And I don't want to give things away, but I'm glad I watched it. It kind of turns into a totally different movie by the end.
Okay, it sounds intriguing.
I watched The Big Boss from 1971. And this is a movie that made Bruce Lee a big name. He plays a guy that moves to Thailand to be with family, and he gets a job with them at an ice factory, but the ice factory is a front for drug smuggling led by the big boss, and he has made a promise not to fight. So for the first few skirmishes he doesn't fight, but eventually he starts kicking ass and he works his way up. The movie is kind of all over the place, and granted I am looking at it through a modern lens, but it's still a good time. It's definitely not as good as some of his later stuff, but I'm okay with it. I watched Drunken Master from 1978, which is a Jackie Chan kung fu comedy movie, so that's usually an indicator of a good time, as long as it's in the right era of his career, and in the right location of his career. So Jackie Chan plays a kid with a superiority complex, and he's always getting into trouble, and eventually his dad is so fed up with his antics and disobedience that he sends him to train with Beggar So, who was actually a real person. Well, I guess in that respect, Jackie Chan's character was actually a real person too. And Jackie Chan himself is a real person. And there's cool training scenes, and there's cool fights, a lot of hijinks, evil mercenaries. It's a good time. Really good fight choreography. And as a kid, I watched one of the dubbed versions. So his name was always Freddy, and Beggar So was always Sam Seed, and the bad guy was Thunderleg. But there's a bunch of dubs out there, I'm pretty sure. And the only recent release of something in high definition or whatever is a Region 2 Blu-ray. And I went to try and find physical media of a Region 1 DVD even. And there are so many random ass releases. I didn't even know what I was looking for because I wanted one that would have subtitles. But it was such a labyrinth, so I ended up not buying anything. Because half the reviews are, I bought Drunken Master, but they sent me World of Drunken Master. This isn't even the right movie. I think it would be cool to have a Drunken Master collection released by, Criterion or Arrow or something. Maybe Shout Factory. Criterion did that with the first 2 Police stories.
Yeah, I could definitely see somebody doing that.
And I think the sequel is only available in its original version in Asia. and watched a movie from 1987, a Canadian movie called Blue Monkey. Have you ever heard of this movie?
I don't think so.
It was also released in some places as Insect.
Those are two very different titles, so I'm very curious.
I'm surprised this movie isn't more popular because it's actually really well made. It has all of the hallmarks of goofy 80s sci-fi alien ripoffs. There's a big hospital that used to be a mental asylum, of course, and naturally it has a giant new laser research section in it. And there's this insect that, of course, ends up getting exposed to radiation and chemicals and something or other, and it just gets gigantic. And there's all these characters in the hospital, and characters can make or break a movie like this. But all of these characters have personalities, they're interesting, they're goofy, and they can actually act too, which makes a huge difference. Well, most of them can. And you don't actually see any of the monster until about 35 minutes, which I was impressed with. And nobody actually dies until around 45. My only complaint was the cinematography concerning the monster wasn't very good. They could have done more with the lighting and stuff, but it seems like somebody wanted to focus on how cool the monster looked. But the rest of the cinematography was good. It was definitely worth a watch. I watched From Beyond from 1986, which is also a Stuart Gordon movie. But I've never actually seen this movie before. This was the first time.
Oh.
Yeah, it's always been on my list. So you got a scientist played by Jeffrey Combs who is working with another scientist, Dr. Pretorius, on experiments that stimulate the pineal gland. Is that right? Pineal?
Yeah, and Praetorius is a reference to the doctor from Bride of Frankenstein.
Saying that like I don't know that. And stimulating this gland will allow them to see beyond the capabilities of normal humans. And I really like the way this movie opens, which is right in the middle of their experiment where things go horribly wrong, and the movie just continues from that point. It was a really cool opening. And Jeffrey Combs is blamed for Pretorius' death because they just found his body up there and his head was twisted off or whatever. So he's locked in a psychiatric ward, and Barbara Crampton, who is a doctor, gets him released under the condition that he recreates their experiments. And Ken Foree comes along as a cop, and it turns out that Pretorius was not only science weird, but regular weird too. There's a lot going on. And they turn on the machine, and he appears as this hybrid human creature thing. It's just really gross. They're monsters, and everyone goes crazy, and the whole movie is gross. And the ending was very Lovecraftian. I mean, I understand this was based on a Lovecraft story, but the ending was just like the ending of a Lovecraft-written story. And it is a small movie, really. Re-Animator felt much bigger compared to this one.
I'm guessing that's because a lot of the money went to the special effects, probably.
Which they apparently ran out of money to do all of them before the filming was completed.
I know their motivation for making that movie was trying to outdo The Thing in terms of the effects and stuff, or at least try to do something on that level.
Well, yeah, that was my next point. This is kind of a combination of Hellraiser and The Thing, just much smaller than both of those. It's not held together as well as either of those either. Things just kind of happen to push the movie forward, like Pretorius' always changing ability to telekinetically control stuff when he's around and when he's not around, or Jeffrey Combs being able to just walk around the hospital and eat people's brains despite being a prime suspect for murder. Some good body horror stuff. It was pretty gross. But like I said, it wasn't as grand as I had always heard the movie was. I watched this British comedy series from 2019 called The Goes Wrong Show. It's an amateur theater company that puts on a live play every week, but everything goes wrong. And that's the sets, the crew, the props, the writing, the actors, everything. And I thought it was funny. I'm all about physical humor. There's a lot of physical humor, but the general writing mishaps worked for me too. And it was good for all ages. So like there's one where the play is called 90 Degrees to reflect the heat, but they build one room of the set adjusted 90 degrees. So everything is bolted to the wall. And there's like a big conference table and all the chairs. And they have to perform the play while they're in that room at risk of falling down to the quote-unquote wall, which is really the floor. And they just turn the cameras so it looks like it's upright. It was pretty funny. So, he'll be like, oh, do you want like a drink? And then he like opens the ice thing and the ice just like smacks all the guy in the face, because it like falls into his face. And he's like, oh yeah, like, he's like, how about some sugar? Like, I liked it. I watched a movie called Dead Space, which has nothing to do with the game. It was from 1991, and it is a Roger Corman produced movie that is actually a remake of a Roger Corman produced movie from 10 years before, Forbidden World, which you've seen, right?
Yeah.
So there's a science lab on a planet that is researching a cure for a virus, but their research gets loose, and it turns out to be the virus itself, and it morphs into this giant alien queen monster. The top billed actor here was actually Mark Singer, who was what? Wasn't he on V?
Yeah, he was also the Beastmaster.
But what I found most amusing was it was one of Bryan Cranston's early roles.
Hmm.
So he's a nobody, but he has some good lines, you know. We thought it would destroy the virus. It is the virus. There's also a robot that's clearly just a person with a robot helmet on. Yeah, it was great. I watched The Fifth Element from 1997, which I've seen before. And that's Luc Besson film. And, you know, I don't seek out movies because Bruce Willis is in them, but he just happened to be in a bunch of movies in this era that I liked.
Hmm.
So you got 12 Monkeys, you got this, you got Beavis and Butthead Do America, Sixth Sense. The last thing I really liked Bruce Willis in was way back in 2007, Planet Terror.
Yes.
And The Fifth Element is all over the place. It just kind of keeps throwing all of these different elements at you until there are five. But really, there's so much going on all at once, and you just kind of have to accept it and grab on and just go with it.
Mm-hmm.
The production design, the effects, they're pretty cool. But overall, this is not the greatest movie ever. It's creative. And growing up, this was the movie my dad would always watch whenever it popped up on TV before all this streaming nonsense. It didn't matter what part of the movie it was, didn't matter what he was doing. He'd always sit down, finish the movie, and then go back and resume his life. Which I can relate, because for my kids, whenever Total Recall is on, I do the same thing. So Bruce Willis is an ex-soldier who is now a cab driver, and the ultimate evil is going to destroy the Earth, and he kind of falls into this series of events where he has to save the world from Gary Oldman. Don't we all? I watched a movie from 1976 called Squirm. Have you seen this?
I don't think so. Is it about worms?
Yeah.
Okay, I may have seen like a trailer or something.
So a storm causes electrical lines to hit the ground, and the electricity is amplified by the wet swamp mud. This is in Georgia, and it causes millions of worms to come out of the ground, and they kill the unsuspecting residents of the town. It has bad acting, not great editing, really goofy sound design, lots of close-ups of some of the worms, which are bloodworms maybe, because they got like teeth, and they're screaming when they do those close-ups. I didn't really understand that. And there were some cool effects, and Rick Baker actually did a good chunk of work on this movie. Because this would have to be pretty early in his career, right?
Yeah. His first movie was Octoman, which was around the same time. Pretty sure that was his first movie.
There was some creative cinematography that came out of left field. And I did some reading, and according to sources, half of the worms used in the film were made of rubber, and the others included large sandworms from Maine, refrigerated and transported to Georgia, and an estimated 3 million bloodworms were provided by a Georgia university, which is pretty impressive. And apparently Bernard Herrmann was originally hired to write the score, but he died before production began. But I'm going to take that with a giant grain of salt, because that just sounds like something anybody could make up after somebody dies.
Yeah, what year was Taxi Driver?
Well, they wanted to do a crossover between those two movies, too.
Oh no, Taxi Driver was 76. Okay, I guess it is the right time.
And the main guy, played by Don Scardino, I'm going to pretend that's how you say his name. He went on to direct a bunch of episodes of 30 Rock, which I thought was really funny.
Interesting.
It was worth watching once.
Not as good as Slugs, I'm assuming. Well, I know you didn't like Slugs as much as I did.
I might have to watch Slugs again.
You can just watch our review.
Well, no. I watched The Quick and the Dead from 1995. You've seen this, right?
Yeah, but not since like 1995.
Okay, I've never seen this before. I had no idea that Sam Raimi directed this movie. And then I saw 5 seconds of cinematography and I said, oh, Sam Raimi must have directed this movie. It's like taking all of his directing practices and turning it up to 11.
Is Gene Hackman the bad guy?
Yeah. Sharon Stone is a wandering gunslinger who comes to this town, and it's ruled by outlaw Gene Hackman, and his gang of thugs.
Oh, is Leonardo DiCaprio in it?
Yeah, I'll get there.
Okay. I'm slowly remembering things.
And there's this contest where if you participate, it's a fast draw tournament, and the winner gets a bunch of cash. And everyone has to fight once per day, and no challenge can be refused. There's all these rules, and everyone's like, yeah, of course, that's how it's always been, but it's so weird. And it turns out that Sharon Stone has this hidden past with the town, and Gene Hackman. I'm glad I checked this out. It also has Russell Crowe, but it was before Russell Crowe was popular, and it's got Lance Henriksen, and it's got Pat Hingle, it's got Gary Sinise, and it's got Leonardo DiCaprio, who was required to have his diaper changed at least 3 times per day because he's freaking 2 years old in this movie. And Sharon Stone co-produced it and was responsible for getting Sam Raimi as a director because she was impressed with his work on Army of Darkness. And I just can't imagine Sharon Stone sitting down being like, hey, let's watch this movie called Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
I watched a movie from 2022, a Swedish film called Black Crab. Which is not what you think it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's about ice skating.
So it is what I thought it was going to be. Okay.
It's about this team of soldiers who have to sneak into enemy territory via ice skating.
But what? Every next thing that you say is like... Okay.
But it's a serious movie. It's not a comedy or anything.
Are you sure?
And the main character is the woman from Prometheus. I can't ever remember her name.
Oh, Numi Rapace? I don't know how you say her name.
So they have this mysterious package that they have to deliver that could end the war that's going on. And they're ice skating across, like, the ocean, basically. And they have to go at night because they don't want to be seen during the day, because then their mission will be ruined. And I think she is a speed skater, so that's why they choose her, because she's not a soldier by trade. And even though there's a whole team of people, the movie didn't really do a great job of fleshing more than a few of them out as the actual characters. And there was suspense and people breaking through the ice, and the secret package is something unexpected and adds more tension. But the whole movie was kind of whatever. I would not recommend watching it unless you really like ice skating at night.
And what made you decide to watch this one?
I don't know. Well, it's called Black Crab. It looked like it had a sci-fi thumbnail, but then it wasn't. It was about ice skating across the sea. I did watch a sci-fi movie, though, called Extinction from 2018, which is about a dude who has dreams about an alien invasion, and it's starting to take over his life and is stressing him and his whole family out, but he's convinced that his dreams mean something, and it turns out they do when aliens invade. And it's very action-y. There's a big, shocking sci-fi twist that nothing is what it seems. And the production design was pretty much every sci-fi movie from the past 10 years, and I would not recommend watching this movie. I watched another 2018 movie, a British film called The Vanishing. So it's based on an actual 1900 event where 3 lighthouse keepers vanished under unknown circumstances. They probably just got washed away by huge waves as the investigation over the decades has gone on. So there are 3 dudes, and one is played by Gerard Butler. And I've got to say, this is the only movie I have ever seen where I said, wow, Gerard Butler really did a nice job acting in this movie. I was washed away by a giant wave of his competent acting. So everything's going normal. So you got Gerard Butler, who knows what he's doing. You got an older guy who's been doing it forever. He's close to retirement. And then you got this younger guy who's just getting into the whole lighthouse keeper stuff. But at one point, they find this shipwrecked little boat. And there's a body down there with it. And so the young guy kind of goes down to see if he's alive, see if there's any supplies, but the guy isn't dead, and he immediately tries to kill the young guy. So in order to defend himself, he has to kill him. And then it turns out that the chest is full of a bunch of gold. So it turns into a psychological stressor in terms of what to do with the gold, how to deal with having murdered that guy. And then when other people come by looking for the gold, they have to hide the fact that they have it. And it was pretty good. I watched a movie from 2023 called Jung-E. I don't actually know if that's how you say it. It is a South Korean movie directed by the same guy who directed Train to Busan. So there's a civil war going on in space. And there's a research center in space trying to perfect a combat AI by using the memories and brain patterns of a top-performing soldier. So they take her brain and basically copy it into all of these android replicas, and they run the replicas through simulations, and they analyze all the data and whatnot. And the team leader of this project is the original soldier's daughter. So there's a whole bunch of backstory about what the project means to her and unanswered questions that she never got to ask her mom. And in the last third, it turns very actiony once they're informed that the company is shutting the project down. And it was okay. And there were some weird injections of humor that didn't really fit with the tone of the rest of the movie. And there's a lot of characters spouting on a bunch of pretty generic stuff that was supposed to sound a lot deeper than it actually was. And you talked about The Black Phone last month, yes?
Yeah, at some point.
So I watched The Black Phone, which is from 2021. And I'm not going to talk too much about it since you did, but I really liked this movie. I don't remember how you felt about it.
I thought it was okay. I thought there were a lot of things that were not explained and were just kind of like, just go along with it.
Well, in order to dial, you kind of have to like drag your finger around the thing. Is that what you didn't understand?
Uh-huh.
I thought the ending was super Stephen King, with the kid utilizing all the other kids' stuff and then them getting their last lines to Ethan Hawke. That was pretty cheesy, but I think it was a worthwhile watch.
I just thought it felt like they kind of threw a bunch of stuff in there and were just like, yeah, she's psychic, like, whatever, and, he's talking to the ghosts, but, we're going to try and make them scary because it's supposed to be a horror movie, even though that doesn't really make sense.
Have you ever read a Stephen King story in your life? You just described all of them.
Well, yes, but I mean, like, Stephen King stories will have ghosts that talk to people, but they're just ghosts. But for that movie, like, I remember the one, like, hanging upside down with, like, blood coming out of its mouth, and it was like,
Yeah.
he can't even see them, right? The kid can't see them.
He could see that one.
Oh, okay. I mean, see, even that, like, why, I don't know. There were just so many questions where I was, like, asking them, and then the producers and writers were like, no, you're not supposed to ask questions, just watch the movie. The kid dialogue was not great. They felt like they were supposed to be adults. Like, whoever was writing didn't understand how to write kids.
Yeah, they'd use way more slang. Even though they were in the 70s, use slang from today. That shit is fire. That's the only slang I know. That shit is fire. No cap.
What does that mean?
Ask your kids.
I don't want to.
So the last thing I'm going to talk about that I watched is Total High Note from 2013, the epic Will Smith film, not even a movie, film, After Earth.
I knew that's what it was going to be.
Oh, man. Okay, I'd heard over the years how bad this movie was, but it is so bad. Have you seen this movie?
No, I was working in a movie theater when it came out, and I remember nobody was going to see it. And I remember somebody coming in and saying, why would anybody want to see that? It has Will Smith and his son in it. The level of arrogance would just like blow everybody out of the theater. Nobody would want to see it, and I guess they were right.
There is so much nothing to this movie. It is one of the most bland, soulless things I have watched in recent memory. It's hard to describe how generic and nothing this movie is. So the premise is humanity is fighting a war, and one of the alien weapons are these creatures that sense humans by their fear, which is already ridiculous. So there are these people who train to suppress their fear. And because these creatures have no other senses other than sensing fear, as long as you're not afraid, you can just walk up and repeatedly stab them in the face. They don't have eyes. They don't have ears.
I mean, then there wouldn't be anything to be afraid of.
Right. And the best guy is Will Smith. And his name is, are you ready for this?
Oh, no.
Cypher Rage. Which is the most PlayStation 1 futuristic cyberpunk fighting game character name there has ever been.
Oh, man.
And because he can effectively suppress his fear, that apparently means he doesn't show any emotion ever. It is a very, 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 very bland and boring performance. And his son in the movie, who is played by Will Smith's son, is always looking to earn his father's respect. And I'll tell you what, Jaden Smith, it's not by being in After Earth. So he's always out there trying to prove himself. And they take a mission to some planet, but they get hit by some rocks, so they crash. And Will Smith can't leave the wreckage because his leg is broken. So he's got to send his son to the other side of the planet to find the other half of the ship, which has the beacons in it or whatever. And the planet they crashed on? Earth. And Will Smith delivers all these lines like they're super serious and not dumb, like Katai. Oh, his son's name is Katai. Katai, everything on this planet, everything, has evolved over the past 1,000 years to do one thing. Kill humans. So we spend most of the movie watching Jaden Smith crying and being a baby and running away from mutant CGI baboons, and Will Smith grunting and bleeding while sitting in a spaceship chair. And there's this one part where Katai gets caught by a huge CGI bird. This is after he jumps off a cliff and his suit somehow has wings or something. And it takes him back to its nest, and there's a bunch of chicks. And then a bunch of giant CGI lions attack the nest. And Katai works to protect the chicks, but they all die anyway, so it's completely pointless. But then later in the movie, every night, temperatures on Earth go down to sub-zero temperatures, but there's like hot spots he can make it to. And he's not going to make it in time. So the giant bird from earlier in the movie drags his body to a hot spot, builds a whole nest over him, then lies down on top of the branches and dies. All so he will survive until the morning. It's not a hyper-intelligent bird, it's just a bird. And he makes it to the other end of the ship, on the other half of the planet, and he kills the big old fear monster because he's learned to suppress his fear. And they are rescued. The end. And listen to this. This is how little the movie actually mattered to the actual people who were behind the making of the movie. This whole movie was just a vehicle to turn this whole thing into a giant multimedia franchise. And I'm quoting here. Pitched to the studio by Will Smith, the intention was to launch a multimedia franchise titled 1000 AE. Plans were originally for After Earth to be followed by a sequel, a live-action television series, an animated television series, webisodes, mobisodes, I'm not sure what those are, a video game, consumer products, theme park attractions, documentaries, comics, an educational program, collaboration and partnership with NASA, cologne, perfume, and a social media platform. And Will Smith, this is quoting Will Smith directly now, Star Trek, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Lord of the Rings, and Harry Potter have all reached such stature, and now they are being joined by 1000 AD. Or AE. Maybe that quote's wrong. How arrogant.
Yeah.
And just stupid. Do not watch the movie. You will die from boredom. They'll find you like you just watched The Ring. So that's all I watched. I read a book of Nordic folk tales, which was really good. I'm all about folklore. Not too much more to say about that. They were just really good. And the book is just called Nordic Tales, and it's from Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and Denmark. You were talking about Resident Evil 7 and Silent Hill and how those horror games are art, and I also played something right in that... What are you laughing at?
No.
I played something in the same vein of that. I was terrified. I played Luigi's Mansion. From 2001, which is a great game. It was a launch title for the GameCube, which back in the day people were upset over because it wasn't a Mario game, which is funny because when Mario Sunshine did come out, it was very underwhelming.
And I don't think anybody plays a Mario game for the character of Mario specifically.
Well, they were looking forward to like the platforming element of it.
Yeah.
So you're Luigi, and you've won a mansion in a contest you never entered. So apparently he's not familiar with spam or phishing or anything like that. And Mario goes to check it out first. And when you arrive, he's nowhere to be found, but there are ghosts all over the place. So you meet the scientist who gives you a ghost vacuum, and you go and clear out the mansion while trying to find Mario. And it's an original idea. It's very Nintendo, and it plays really well. The design of everything is great, and the gameplay is simple. It's fairly straightforward, and it is fun. There's some aspects that haven't aged as well, like the controls and camera perspectives don't always mesh as well as they could, and some of the puzzles for the ghosts get a little bit annoying because you know what you have to do, but it takes too long to do it because there's just these little snags you keep running into, but those are minor complaints. The charm and the humor are great, and that puzzle aspect on how to capture the ghosts keeps things from getting too monotonous. And the only thing that gets too repetitive is when you got to capture the 50 boos that are scattered throughout the mansion, especially when they go through a wall into an entirely different part of the house, and you got to backtrack a lot. That's my only major complaint. I never played the second one, but I did play the third one, which was fine, and the co-op was cool. But this first one is just really solid. It's not very long, which is good. It is what it is. It doesn't try and expand past its bounds. And at the time when it came out, back in the early 2000s, there was that push that said, if a game is good, it has to take a really long time to complete. Those are directly correlated to each other, which is such bullshit. You remember that time, right?
I mean, I guess I never really thought about it, but yeah, I could see that.
Replay value only meant how long does it take, which is not really what replay value is.
Yeah.
And lots of games at that time went way too far, and they drew themselves out for no reason and actually detracted from the game overall. So I'm glad the developers of this said, this is a good length for this game. This is what the game is. And there is a new game plus, which is cool, but the PAL version actually makes a lot better use of it. And I think the 3DS remake incorporated all of the PAL stuff, which is cool. Great game. I played this game called Arrow. There's a question mark there because I'm not sure if that's actually how you're supposed to say it. It's spelled Aaero,
Yeah, I guess.
which is a on-rails rhythm game, which is pretty simple. You use the left stick to ride along rails and use the right stick to target enemies. Good visuals. I think it was only made by 2 guys, and it's got a pretty decent EDM soundtrack. It wasn't too long, and it played pretty well. And I played the Wonder Boy Returns remix from 2019, which is an upgraded version of Wonder Boy Returns, which was a remake of Wonder Boy, which was a 1986 Sega arcade game. So it has visual and sound upgrades, new characters, new levels, online achievements, but gameplay-wise, it is the same game, which from a purist standpoint is good, I guess, but the game is 1980s arcade difficult to the point of feeling unfair. And back in the day, it was ported to the Master System and a bunch of other stuff, but Sega approached it directly from the arcade perspective, even to the point where your health gradually decreases by doing nothing because it's a gameplay timer. And the stage design itself does not feel creative or like the person designing the stages understood the concepts of stage design. Start left and end right. Okay, but what if I said start left and end right? I imagine that was the discussion going on in Sega. A lot of cheap deaths. Not to mention everything kills you in one hit. But it doesn't feel rewarding when you beat a level. It's kind of just, finally, okay, whatever. And every time you die, you just get irritated because it was cheap. Most of the time it's cheap. There's a lot of frustration, especially in this day and age with the plethora of indie platformers. Even bad indie platformers can be better than this game. It's really just a historical thing that this game exists. The straight A to B, mostly flat, with enemies that don't have a lot of variety and repetitive music, is not super interesting. And the last time I looked, it was $15. But I think if you're buying this, you know what you're buying, and you're only buying it to relive your Wonder Boy years. And in terms of the series, I definitely preferred Monster World 4, which is the 6th Wonder Boy game. So that's not confusing at all. And that's all I did this month.
Well, that was a lot.
I went the same time as you.
But I had interesting things to talk about.
I don't even remember what you talked about.
Yeah, I don't either.
What month are we actually on for release of these? Did we get August out yet?
I don't think so.
I'm so busy doing Star Treks.
Yeah.
But once that's done, we're only going to do these videos. Nothing else. So we want to hear what you think. Which one is scarier? Resident Evil 7 or Luigi's Mansion? Is Silent Hill art?
That question doesn't even need to be answered.
By classifying it as art, does that make it no longer art?
Oh, jeez. Hey, I already got my art degree. I don't want to go back to those stupid-ass discussions.
Can art actually be created?
Don't actually answer these questions in the comments. I don't want to know what you guys have to say. I don't want to know what anybody has to say to answer these questions.
Well, if you want my opinion,